We're going to talk about a really fascinating topic today about cyclical wisdom around the Jewish calendar in general, but we're going to be specific for this time of year. Today is Rosh Chodesh Av. It's the first of the 9 days, and it's a season of generally mourning, grief, sadness. We're in a state of mourning for what we lost as a Jewish people, as a nation, over 2,000 years ago. This is a time of year where we sort of put aside for that. But there's really so much, how do we apply this, where it's been such a long time ago, how do we apply this in our life today? There's so much that we can actually live and experience and appreciate about this time that's not just about, it's so much more. We'll dive into that, and we'll specifically, from my approach, where I come from, is I dive into the wisdom of the menstrual cycle, or cycles in general. It's not specifically just the menstrual cycle, where it applies to the moon cycle as well. It applies to any cycle of pregnancy and birth. As women, we are the keepers of the feminine. We are the keepers of the cycle. And there's so much there that just helps us have a different perspective, especially in this time of year where it's okay, what is this asking of us? What is this season? What is this concept of exile and redemption? How do we live it? How do we experience it? So there's so much we're going to explore. And if you're on here live, you're welcome to drop in questions. I'll try to answer as best as possible if I see them. But let's first give a basic background, a basic overview. What is a cycle, and how do we experience this exile and redemption dynamic, specifically as Jewish women, because we cycle through Niddah and Tahara, right? That cycle itself of Taharat HaMishpacha is a very big manifestation of exile and redemption, but we think it's just because of those laws that we follow. It's actually intrinsic in our menstrual cycle itself. It's in the nature of our cycle, the physiology of our cycle, the energetics of our cycle, that it's literally living in us. And there's also a concept that from the beginning of time, the 6,000 years of creation is but one moon cycle. What is time even? Time is a construct of our own conception, right? So there's this concept that those 6,000 years are about one moon cycle. So if we look at that concept of, time is literally just a unit. It's just something. So whether we have a monthly cycle, whether we have the annual cycle of the Jewish calendar that we move through different seasons, whether it's, different cycles that we move through. There's so many different cycles of life. And then, of course, the bigger cycle. So there's cycles within cycles. And I love just exploring all the nuances and everything that we can get out of it. So since we are cycling women, if you're a cycling woman, or if you connect to the moon cycle, or if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you're also in a cycle of life. If you're postmenopause, you have experienced the cycle of life. So as women, we are holding this in our bodies. It's a very body-based, intrinsic, visceral, experiential experience. And that's what's really powerful about it, because there's something about knowledge in our head, and there's something about felt experience. So when we go through a cycle, when we live through our cycle, then we're conscious of it. When we literally we're embodied and we're being present with it, there's so much to gain from it, and there's much less bypassing. So much of the negative part of the cycle, right, or the negative feelings or the negative parts of the year, the season and the year, we sometimes just bypass it because we're not comfortable being with it, or we don't have the tools to actually be with it, and not just be with it, to really gain and glimpse the light hidden in the dark, or the good that's actually there that we need to reveal, because this work is actually revealing the goodness. So we think of things as very black and white, good or bad, but really, essentially, there's this Kabbalistic concept. I'll go really deep here, why not? That there's no such thing as bad, right? Good is, if we believe everything is Hashem, everything is God, then everything is good. But what is this concept of evil? What is this concept of bad or negative? It's anything that has an illusion of other, an illusion of not being part of godliness. And the reason we have this concept is because if it wouldn't be that, if everything would just be revealed, then we wouldn't have the full choice of connection, that full choice of being with Hashem, with godliness, with divinity. So all that, everything that's other, is an illusion. Really, everything is connection, everything is wholeness, everything is unity. But so if we know that everything is really good, we know that we can reveal the goodness under the darkness. So if this is a lot of this is going to be touching on deep concepts. And if you've been around here, you know that I'm actually giving a workshop on Wednesday that's going to dive into this so much more and answer so many of your questions in much more detail. This is just literally scratching the surface. But this is literally my life's work. When we look at menstruation, right? who here thinks of menstruation as something positive, as something good? I mean, that's not the way we're brought up. That's not the way we look at it just at first glance. But through my work and everything that I've been exploring around this, I see it as such a sacred and powerful time. Not just the period, but the premenstrual phase as well. And like the parts of the cycle that we sort of look at as negative, or that we just have to push through, or just not, like, it's just bad, and like, why do we have this? Or it's Chava's curse. Like, that's my favorite to explore and delve into. So this idea, this working to reveal the good, the hidden good, that is intrinsically a feminine concept. The feminine, the power of the feminine, the work of the feminine is to reveal the hidden good. And we do that through our body-led experience. That's how the feminine like lives through this life. That's how we women, we are the ones that are literally experiencing life and death in our bodies, right? Through each cycle, through birth, through loss, and even through birth itself, right? Why do we become Niddah after birth if it's life, right? So the concept of Niddah, we're gonna let's backtrack a little bit. The concept of Niddah means that there's been a death, right? So there is a potential for life every time we ovulate and release an egg that has the potential for conception. And then at the end of the cycle, we have our period. It's like, oh, that potential for life wasn't actualized, so that's a kind of mini death, so to speak. Like, we have a touch of death in our bodies. And we think of all these things as negative, but once we understand the power of these polarities and these opposites and this moving through different worlds and different experiences and being in different states of life and death, actualized potential, release, relieving, like all that stuff. It's really deeper work that we have to know how to be present with and hold space for, because our world is not honoring and respecting that in many ways. But even birth itself, where you think of, oh, that's life. How is that Niddah? Why does that put us in a state of Niddah if we're giving birth to new life? Because something was in our body, the life, the creative energy, the life force energy was in our body, and then after birth, it left our body. So yeah, the baby is there. There is definitely a new life in the world, but our body released that life, and now there's a death inside our body. So this is everything is internal. Feminine experience is internal, and internal, think of internality, of darkness, like it's all there. Like the womb is a dark place. There's so much there like that. We're revealing light in the dark, and light only exists because of the darkness. So you need that. I heard a very interesting concept by the word negativity, right? We think of negative. If you think of the negative space, right? Like when you have a page of written words. I heard this concept from Tamar Tabak. She speaks a lot about these deeper feminine concepts. And if you think about a written page, and the words itself are what stands out at you, but the blank, the white background is the negative space. And if we wouldn't have that, you wouldn't be able to read the words, right? The words are obvious only because of the negative space. So negative is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the polarity, the opposite, that brings out the light. The darkness brings out the light. We need both. So as women, we travel through these different seasons. So let's break down the menstrual cycle, just because that's the sort of symbol that I follow for this work. But like I said before, it applies to the moon cycle. It applies to so many different cycles. But I'll just go through the seasons of the phases of the menstrual cycle. And some of you might be familiar with this. I'll just recap it. And if you're not familiar with it, then this might be the first time you hear this concept. But we have 4 stages or 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. And this is not necessarily scientific. Like if you look from a scientific perspective, there's actually only 2 phases. We have the follicular before ovulation, and then we have the luteal after ovulation. But I'm breaking it down completely differently for the energetics, how we move and shift through different states of being throughout our cycle. So yes, we have our period. That's our menstrual phase. And to compare it to inner season, so like I said, cycles are everywhere. So we have the cycles of the seasons. We have winter, spring, fall, summer, fall, right? Those are the 4 seasons of the year, and we literally experience that in our bodies. So even the seasons of the earth, right, is a cycle of life and death, right? If you think about winter, everything is like sort of dead or under the surface, and even in that like darkness, so to speak, there is life, new life growing. Like that's where the life begins to sprout, under the surface. But everything is under the surface. It's only when it becomes visible and actualized potential, that's already spring, summer energy. So on our period, we are in the winter phase of our menstrual cycle, and that's when we literally like nurture that internal space that we have, that we want to be connected to ourselves. And that's actually what the power of the Niddah phase is as well, because when we have a relationship, there's the focus and the goal of relationship is unity and connection, right? And that's really important. But a real connection compared to something that's more enmeshed is very different, right? If you have just two things that are connected, but then they sort of like mix together, that's not a connection. That's just they became something like a mumble jumble or whatever. It's not actually a connection. Versus you have two solid individuals who are connecting and forming a union. That's a real connection because you are yourself, you are an individual, and you also have a union of two solid individuals. So the Taharas HaMishpacha process actually nurtures both of these. Like we have the space for the self and the individual and the creative process and anything that like sparks you individually as a person. And then we have the unification process of coming together as a couple and putting aside the self, going beyond the self, right, for the other, or connecting with another, and like both selves going beyond themselves for a higher union. And that's really the purpose of marriage. That's the sacredness of marriage. But the Taharas HaMishpacha process holds space for both, because if we don't have one, we don't have the other. We need to have that individual process in order to come together from a sacred, healthy place. So that's where the cycle really honors both. And put aside Taharas HaMishpacha for a second, the cycle energetics itself, if we honor how our cycle works as women, it gives us space. Why do we have all these symptoms of premenstrual, like, symptoms, or mood swings, or stress, or all that, like sort of symptoms coming to a crash right before our period, or sometimes even cramps on our period, and all those different uncomfortable symptoms? What if, and I'm not like diagnosing anything or saying anything for sure, this is going to be your process to explore, but what if those are messengers telling you that this is not like you have to slow down? This is not like a masculine process of going without taking time to rest. Like we really have to honor that space and time that our body is telling us to slow down. And then we come out of the winter space, we come out of the menstrual period, and we come into the what's called the follicular phase, or our inner spring, and that's the time between our period until as we lead up to ovulation, and that's when everything is happening in our body. The egg follicles that are going to become eggs are starting to grow and mature. Estrogen is a very important hormone that's rising in this time, and that's going to help us ovulate. There's so much, really the theme of this phase is rising energy, like upward. And it makes so much sense if you compare ovulation, which is the actualized potential of an egg being released, right? And that's like the ultimate life force energy that we create in our bodies. That's the potential for life. That is the symbol of, you compare that to redemption in the cycle of exile and redemption. That's where we're in that phase now of like moving towards Mashiach. We want to like rise towards that energy. It's like an upward movement. But then the cycle goes up and down, right? It's not just all the way up. Well, it's more nuanced than that, because we're really actually a spiral. So yes, each cycle works through each part of it, but it also moves upward and upward and upward. So that's like we have the best of both worlds, so to speak. Like we get to really work through all parts of the cycle, but we also, each time we come to the same point of the cycle, we're a different person, we're a different relationship, we're a different nation, we're a different process. So it's kind of like, when let's say you have a trigger that you've worked through, or in therapy or healing work or whatever you were doing for it, and the trigger doesn't necessarily disappear. You might still be triggered by the same thing, but you notice because of the work you've done that you come to that same place for the same situation where that might trigger you, but you're different. Yes, it might trigger you in a different way, or you might feel something, which is normal because it lives in our bodies and it doesn't always just disappear. But your process is different. You are different. You became different, right? So when we work through the cycle this way, we honor the experiences and we literally live with the experiences of life and death within us, of exile and redemption within us, of winter and summer, day and night, light and dark. Like we have these two polarizing energies in us, but each part, first of all, the contrast of each is what makes each one distinct, right? If we wouldn't have light, if we wouldn't have dark, we wouldn't know what light is, right? And if we wouldn't have light, we wouldn't know what dark is. Like both of these have immense power that we only actually can tap into because the other exists. So the opposite exists to sort of highlight each one individually. So we need that polarity, and it exists for a reason. At the same time, we are also moving upward. So it will come a time where, just like as cycling women, we reach a point where we stop cycling and we don't have these back and forth energies. And it's like the post-menopausal stage where, from a Taharas HaMishpacha perspective, you're sort of in everlasting bliss, or you're not having the Niddah process anymore. So you're sort of like in it's almost like a geula experience of like, okay, you had that exile and redemption process throughout each cycle, and then you have your relationship reached a point where you work through all these different cycles, your individual reached a point where you work through these different cycles, and you come to a point of sort of arrival. And that's also similar to what we'll experience when Mashiach comes. Like, we work through all these different cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles, but it's also an upward spiral. So we're also moving upward. But going back to the seasons of the menstrual cycle, the phases of the cycle, so we arrive to ovulation, which is our inner summer, and that's our peak. That's when we usually coincides with mikvah. Not always. I don't make generalizations about women's cycles. We each have our own cycle. But in the typical sense, the mikvah night usually comes out about a day or two, or around those, 2 days off maybe from actual ovulation. And it's that same energy of arrival, of connection, of life-giving energy. But then after that, there is a fall again, right? There's a rise and fall. There's an ebb and flow. That's the nature of a cycle. Increase, decrease, ascent and descent, growth and decay, life and death. So the premenstrual phase or the post-ovulation phase is when we begin winding down again. And you might be familiar with this feeling. If you feel after, like, as you get close to your period, you might experience this of like this letdown, or this like down feeling. And sometimes we pathologize it. We're like, oh, this is something wrong, or we shouldn't be, like feeling this, or this must be, PMS, or maybe it is, but like we think of it as something wrong. But what if that's actually a reflection of what we're experiencing in our body physiologically? Like our mental, emotional, and spiritual condition is also reflected in our physical. And it's normal. It's normal to feel that letdown feeling, versus after a period, you might have this drive and this energetic, like, we can conquer the world kind of feeling. And then that might be like more of a winding down. Okay. And if we understand what it actually is, it's like, okay, let me retreat back into myself. Like, I moved outwards to the world. And this applies in so many different ways. It applies in our relationship. It applies to the world, like how we're showing up in the world, how we're showing up as a mother, how we're showing up in our other relationships. It's not just about marriage. It's how we're showing up in general on the outside, externally, and then moving and retreating back inward, internally, because we need that balance of self and other, of internal and external. That's why I know, like, I for one, like, don't love when people like say definitely, oh, I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert. Like, are you really all introvert or all extrovert, or do you cycle through differently depending on where you're at and what your needs are in the moment, right? So ovulation is the peak, and then we start moving downward again, and we come to our next cycle, next period, and that's the inner winter again. So that's the cycle of moving upward towards ovulation, downward towards menstruation, and back and forth. And that is a positive and negative, so to speak, right? It's actually, there's if you're familiar with the work of Red School, the book Wild Power, I mentioned that book a lot. It talks about the energetics of the different phases of the menstrual cycle. And they have this image, this diagram of, it's called the via positiva, as we have the upward movement, and then the via negativa as we go the downward movement. And it's not about good or bad. Like I said before, the negative space is just like the background of how we can actually see the words on the page. So we need both, or both are equally important. And the downward movement is what helps us have the upward movement again, right? Like, what are we rising from? We also went down to depths, and that's our power as women. We can go to the highest heights and also down to the deepest depths, and we can literally explore so many different ways of being, states of being, and be in so many ways. Like, our power is in the being, in the presence. So that's the menstrual cycle, the energetics, the phases of the menstrual cycle. And let's compare that to, how does that compare to this time of year, to the seasons of the annual Jewish calendar in general? So I've always been really passionate about this. There are different seasons of the year. There's the spring season when we celebrate redemption, right? That's when it's Pesach and that whole season. Then we have the winter season, Tu B'Shvat, and that like whole energy of, which is actually the polar opposite of where we're at now. So this is another interesting point. We have the seasons, and then we also have we always have the polar opposite. So winter itself is the season of death and inward and downward, but it's also within that we also have the growth starting. We also have the new year for the trees and the celebration of new life in that sense. And then now we're in the summer, you would think this is the highest peak, and it is in many ways physically, and like that's the season we're in. But this is also when we have the season of the 9 days, the season of Tisha B'Av, the season of downward, because we are going to end up moving more like when we're at the highest point, that's when we have the descent, right? If like we go up all the way to ovulation, that's when we can start coming back down. And when we go all the way down to menstruation, that's when we can start coming back up. So it's always the constant renewal and the constant like being in the season we're in. So the 9 days and Tisha B'Av is very much a reflection of the energy of the death and the decay and the mourning and the grief and the being in that messiness, really, because there's so much messiness in life. There's so much messiness in the world, right? We're definitely experiencing so much these days, especially, and really in all times, where it's like, this is such a messy world, this is such a messy life, and like being with that. And this gives us really, if you think about anyone who's been in a state of mourning, whether they lost a loved one, we have specific laws for them to be in that process, to honor that process, because that is literally being with it viscerally is what helps you process it and helps you integrate it. And this is what we're doing. Our Jewish calendar gives us a space for all our individual griefs, all our individual troubles, or our individual traumas, whatever anyone is dealing with. This is where you get to process it, and you get to process it anytime you need to. But like on the Jewish calendar, we have these different energies, these different times and spaces for honoring the fullness of life. Like we're not bypassing any of these harder emotions, the harder sides of life. We're not bypassing any of it. We're not saying only the positive feelings are good. We're not saying only the redemption and joy. Like there's v'samachta b'chagecha in on Sukkot, but there's also in Av we are honoring the like grief and the sadness, because there's room for all of it and there's a time for everything. So yeah, every year we come to this time of year and I'm like, I feel so much about this time of year, specifically with cycles and the wisdom of cycles that I want to share. And I've never like put it all together in a way that I can share it clearly and coherently. And now for the first time, I was like, okay, we got to get this out. We got to get this to more women. This is so powerful. And this helps on twofold. Because we have this experience in our bodies, it helps us understand the exile and redemption process more clearly and what that means as women, because women are the forebears of redemption, right? Like we are the ones in every generation. And why? Why is that? Because we literally birth redemption. We literally experience it and process it in our bodies through all these cycles. And so yeah, this understanding of our cycles can help us so much in the process of exile and redemption, understanding this time of year better and just being present with it in a way that feels meaningful. And at the same time, it can also help us be with our bodies in a way that's more empowering, right? So many of us feel shame and frustration and impatience with our cycles and the lesser pleasant maybe parts of it. But what if it holds so much power that we can actually tap into, right? So the workshop that I created that's going to be this Wednesday, The Secrets of Niddah, is twofold in this way. It's addressing the Niddah part of like, okay, I know so many women are struggling with this because it's not what we're naturally prepared for or like taught to honor and respect. It's like, oh, this is just something that I need to get through to get to the other side, or it's not really the better part. And maybe it's not. Maybe the mikvah and the coming back together is the better part, is the purpose. But do we just have to like, suffer through those 12 days or just like be depressed or sad or like isolated where we're missing out on so much, because there's so much power in that phase that we can tap into if we know what it is and we know what it holds for us. So there's so much there that I'm going to give over for that part. But then at the same time, I'm specifically doing this in the 9 days because at the same time, this also helps you, just be present with this time of year better. So it's the same knowledge helping us as women be present with our cycles, and the same knowledge helping us be present in this season of the year, the season of the annual cycle, because all cycles are parallel in so many ways, to help us really, be present with that and find meaning and hopefully really process the exile in a way that actually brings redemption. Because I believe that, bypassing it is not, what's the point of exile and redemption? What's the point of working for something or anything like that? Is really experiencing the fullest pleasure of the end result, right? So we don't experience the full pleasure of end result if we're just like numb through the process, or if the process is what helps us actually achieve it in the most beautiful way. So the process of exile, the process of Niddah, the process of our cycles, our period, menstruation, is what also helps us appreciate the other side so much more, and even helps us appreciate the process itself. The process is so feminine, right? Feminine is process oriented, masculine is results oriented, and we need both. Like whenever I talk about feminine, it's not that feminine is superior. It's just that we don't honor the feminine as much in our world, and we need to honor it more. We need to understand its gifts more, and it's the biggest way to do it is to tap into our cycles, to our feminine nature, to our embodiment of the feminine as women, because women are the keepers of the feminine in this world. The moon is the keeper of the feminine up above, and the woman is feminine down below. So there's so many parallels to that also that we can get into a whole different conversation. I mean, it is Rosh Chodesh, and that's when I love bringing that together, because Rosh Chodesh is a woman's holiday because it honors the cyclical nature that we have as women and the moon has, and it's parallel in so many ways. But that is the gist of what I was hoping to share today. If you're on live and you have specific questions, this is where you can totally type it in the comments, and I'll address it. If there's anything specific you wanted me to go into a little bit more or clarify. If not, you can definitely reach out, DM me if you want more information about the workshop on Wednesday, where we're going to dive into this so much more. I'm going to post it again on my stories so you can check it out. It's this Wednesday, so you have 2 days left. If you can't watch it live, it will be recorded, so don't worry about that. It's on this Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern time. So if you're in Israel, it's 8 o'clock. If you're somewhere else in the world, it's, calculate, do the math. But it will be recorded if you can't make it live. And it's also the perfect thing to watch on Tisha B'Av, because it's empowering in both ways, empowering in the, Geula process, the exile redemption process, and empowering in our own cycles, and really appreciating the microcosmic relationship, right? The marriage relationship is a microcosm of our relationship with Hashem. So there are so many parallels, so many ways we experience it in our relationship, in our entire Samashpacha process, that is literally, essentially, our relationship with Hashem in so many ways. So we'll dive into all that more. What else? I mean, we're going to go into more of the seasons of the cycle, the entire process, the relationship with Hashem, our relationship with our spouse, and how there's so many parallels there. It was such a treat. I was able to join live. I'm looking forward to Wednesday's class. Thanks for all that you do. It's so helpful and inspiring. Thank you. I really appreciate your message. And everyone that's joined here live, and everyone that's coming to the workshop. It's going to be really awesome. I'm so excited to actually do this finally, because literally every year I'm like, okay, we need to do this. We need to talk about this, because women need to know this. So I'm looking forward. I'll post more information on my stories. And if you have any questions, feel free to DM me. And have a beautiful rest of your day.